Doctors removed the cancer and the surrounding portion of her right lung. But in a routine checkup 4.5 years later, more bad news.
It was just a routine chest x-ray. And at that point is when they actually discovered that the cancer had not only returned in the lung that they had removed most of it surgically, but also it had metastasized to the left lung as well.
Shortly afterward, a television news story Sue happened to be watching told about a local cancer clinical trial that was focused on the particular kind of cancer she was battling.
For me, after 1 week of taking this particular drug, I noticed immediate changes. My husband and I noticed that my lung cancer symptoms basically stopped. Some of the tumors have now diminished up to 90%. It has just helped me not only with providing me some time in my life, but it's helped give me a lot of comfort. My symptoms, I just feel so much better.
Sue Nelson's quick response to the treatment used in her cancer clinical trial is not a typical one. Even clinical trials that result in similar positive outcomes can often take many months or longer to complete. And though clinical trials are the main avenue for discovering new and effective treatments, most adult cancer patients are not taking part.
And we mentioned that at the top of the program. There could be many reasons for that. Access to nearby hospitals or research facilities where the trials take place, perhaps social and cultural reasons, but we'll talk about that in a moment.
Well, that's right, but there's also a fear factor that these clinical trials may be too experimental, and researchers feel that there needs to be an educational process that takes place so patients can better understand just how beneficial clinical trials can be.
And there are specific requirements for these clinical trials that protect the patients as well, but still a vast majority of these patients choose not to take part. Thanks, Julie. To see how much of a problem this is, just look at this Healthy Body, Healthy Mind Q&A. Question: what percentage of adult cancer patients volunteer for cancer clinical trials? Answer: only 3 to 5% of adult cancer patients take part in clinical trials. In children's cancer research, the percentage is a great deal higher, over 70%. For more information about cancer clinical trials, log on to our website at healthybodyhealthymind.com. Some researchers say the reason the percentage is higher for children is because parents want the best, most up-to-date treatment available. A fact that seems incongruous to the fear factor experienced by adult cancer patients. But the fear factor does exist. For some, the reasons are often caused by misinformation. For others, history itself can be reason enough. Here's Carlos Bain.
Charlene Wallace is a cancer survivor. She is also a cancer clinical trial success story. But in order to take part in the trial, she needed to deal with a generations-old piece of history.
Initially, I was apprehensive, thinking, clinical trial, no, don't try anything on me. When I think about clinical trials, the first thing that comes to mind is the Tuskegee study. And I think about what was done during that time, how people were treated, and I think how unfortunate it was, and how unfortunate that it's still embedded within the African American community.
The Tuskegee study Wallace refers to was a U.S. government study that took place from the 1930s to 1972. 399 African American men signed with the U.S. Public Health Service for free health care. At the time, the service was performing a study on the effects of the sexually transmitted disease, syphilis, which was plaguing Macon County, Alabama in the early 1930s. But to measure the effects of the disease over time, the men were never told they had syphilis, and its symptoms were never treated. When the study was uncovered in 1972, there were 28 deaths from the disease and 100 other deaths from related causes. the effects of the Tuskegee study can still be felt in the African American community today. For Wallace, it was an initial roadblock to her involvement in cancer clinical trials.
Sure, absolutely. I spoke with my mom, who's of course a different generation, and then a girlfriend of mine who's just a few years younger than myself. And I shared the information in terms of that I was thinking about participating in a clinical trial. And they both said, "Oh no, what do you mean? What about the Tuskegee study? You know, what are they going to do to you? Are they going to use you as a guinea pig? Don't do it. Don't participate." So yes, it's deeply embedded through generations.
There are cultural barriers. The African American community remembers Tuskegee.
Ellen Siegel of Friends of Cancer Research, an organization that brings together public and private partnerships for the purpose of cancer research, spends much of her time trying to re-educate the general public about the concept of clinical trials.
It's enormously difficult. It's enormously difficult because it's what you know. It's what our values are. It's what we have as a foundation. So when we are told about Tuskegee and when we're told about not to trust physicians, or when we're worried about Frankenstein experiments or some crazy scientist in a lab, it's very difficult to overcome that. So it needs education, it needs trust. We and many others look for ways to get more people involved in clinical trials. Sometimes that's a matter of simply making people aware of what a clinical trial is, that it's not a way of testing people like guinea pigs, quite to the contrary. In cancer, clinical trials are comparing the gold standard of care or something that we have very good scientific grounds for believing is even better. So it's the best or better that's being compared in a clinical trial.
And then there's a large number of doctors. I mean, these groups that participate with clinical trials, from my point of view, that's la creme de la creme. That's the best of the best.
Researchers say the days of a Tuskegee-like debacle are gone forever. Today, even the initial idea for a clinical trial is scrutinized for patient safety and protection issues, long before the actual trial gets underway.
Well, the first thing that people have to understand is that before a patient ever gets enrolled in a clinical trial or a clinical trial gets approved, there are many layers of approval. There are many layers. There are animal models. There are FDA approvals on it. There are academic review boards that look at it. So one doesn't get to go on a clinical trial unless we know that all of those approvals have been met.
The safety mechanisms are huge. The advantage of the clinical trials is that there is a safety net, and there is not a safety net when you're just treated by a doctor off a clinical trial. When you're treated off a clinical trial, nobody collects the data. Nobody knows how many people respond. Nobody knows how many people had side effects. Nobody knows anything other than that one doctor.
Participating in a cancer clinical trial is strictly a voluntary decision. And like many healthcare-related issues, much of the responsibility in learning about the details is up to the individual patient.
First thing that a person wants to do is really talk to their doctor, talk to their healthcare provider about, what is this disease? What are my options? What are the current standards of treatment? What are the other options that are available that might be more investigational? And so it's an iterative process in which a discussion takes place.
But ironically, physicians themselves are a part of the roadblock to more patient participation for cancer clinical trials.
I guess my concern is that because I'm one who believes that clinical trials represents the cutting edge of medicine, and because only 3% of patients go on clinical trials, I have questions about whether all the options or the options are really presented to the patients, so that they have that they know that clinical trials are there and what they can do and the different options.
Dr. Atkins sees the cancer patients themselves playing a leadership role in raising the percentage of volunteers.
The AIDS patients came out in droves to go on the clinical trials with AIDS drugs, and we found dramatic progress with AIDS treatment very quickly because patients wanted to be on the clinical trials. Why? They knew that. They knew that was going to be the cutting edge. They knew that's where the new drugs were. And so that with AIDS, we now have 20, 21, 22 drugs, whatever, large number of drugs that are very active in the AIDS population. And I think as we see cancer move forward, and hopefully it will move forward in the same way, and I think we'll see it happen at the same speed, it'll be breathtaking.
So many cancer clinical trial advocates remain hopeful that the apprehension level of potential candidates will drop as physician participation increases, opening up more opportunities for clinical trials and perhaps creating an increase in new and effective cancer management and prevention therapies.
Obviously, there are many factors that cause low participation rates in cancer clinical trials. Most seem to center around communication. First is the mistakes that have been made in the past, as you pointed out earlier, when now stringent guidelines are the norm. Then there's the patient education, where not only the patients themselves have to be educated, but family, physicians, and the oncologists as well.
That's right, so the work now is being done to recruit older patients and patients from minority populations, because these groups are having an increase in cancer rates.
The progress is sometimes slow, but progress seems to be happening. Thanks, Carlos. And a revolutionary shift that's beginning to look like a possibility is the effort to transform cancer from a disease that leads to death to one that looks more like a manageable chronic disease. Dr. Gregory Kurt is the former director of clinical research at the National Cancer Institute.
You can actually imagine the day when people will live with cancer rather than being cured of cancer. And that, to me, is the definition of a chronic disease. We don't cure diabetes. We don't cure hypertension. We treat it. We treat it very effectively, and people survive for decades. When we can treat cancer without needing to cure it, we'll make it a chronic disease.
It's a great feeling. It's a great feeling. It's a feeling of survivalship. It's a feeling of empowering myself, empowering others, to let people know that, hey, this is a battle we can absolutely win.
There is no magic bullet. There can be, though, a magic strategy. And I have no choice but to do everything I can to try to bring those two together in a way that the fruits of this endeavor eliminate the suffering and death that patients are experiencing.
I would want them treated the way I would want to be treated, and I want to be treated on a clinical trial. Okay? There's no question in my mind about that. None whatsoever, because that represents the cutting edge of medicine.
Researchers give full credit to clinical trial volunteers for helping to make new discoveries in cancer treatment possible. It's their hope that as the number of volunteers increases, more new discoveries to fight this disease will follow. That's it for this edition of Healthy Body, Healthy Mind. I'm Dr. Perry Kritschmar. See you next time. For more information about cancer clinical trials, log on to our website at healthybodyhealthymind.com.
Healthy Body, Healthy Mind is brought to you by Pfizer, dedicated to humanity's quest for longer, healthier, happier lives.
And by GE Medical Systems.